Heart of Darkness, page 41. We two whites stood over him, and his lustrous and inquiring glance enveloped us both. I declare it looked as though he would presently put to us some question in an understandable language, but he died without uttering a sound, without moving a limb, without twitching a muscle. Only in the very last moment, as though in response to some sign we could not see, to some whisper we could not hear, he frowned heavily, and that frown gave to his black death mask an inconceivably somber, brooding, and menacing expression. The luster of inquiring glance faded swiftly into vacant glassiness. "Can you steer?" I asked the agent eagerly. He looked very dubious, but I made a grab at his arm, and he understood at once I meant him to steer, whether or no. To tell you the truth, I was morbidly anxious to change my shoes and socks. "He is dead," murmured the fellow, immensely impressed. "No doubt about it," said I, tugging like mad at the shoelaces. "And by the way, I suppose Mr. Kurtz is dead as well by this time." So he clearly wants to get his shoes and socks off because they're filled with blood. So number 23, maybe, what happens to the helmsman after he shoots the rifle out of the window of the boat? He gets stabbed by a spear and is killed. For the moment, that was the dominant thought. There was a sense of extreme disappointment, as though I had found out I had been striving after something altogether without a substance. I couldn't have been more disgusted if I had traveled all this way for the sole purpose of talking with Mr. Kurtz. I flung one shoe overboard and became aware that that was exactly what I had been looking forward to, a talk with Kurtz. I made the strange discovery that I had never imagined him as doing, but as discoursing. I didn't say to myself, "Now I will never see him," or "Now I will never shake him by the hand," but "Now I will never hear him." The man presented himself as a voice. Not, of course, that I did not connect him with some sort of action. Hadn't I been told in all the tones of jealousy and admiration that he had collected, bartered, swindled, or stolen more ivory than all the other agents together? That was not the point. The point was in his being a gifted creature, and that of all his gifts, the one that stood out preeminently, that carried with it a sense of real presence, was his ability to talk, his words, the gift of expression, the bewildering, the illuminating, the most exalted and the most contemptible, the pulsating stream of light, or the deceitful flow from the heart of an impenetrable darkness. The other shoe went flying into that devil god of the river, unto the devil god of that river. I thought, by Jove, it's all over. We are too late. He has vanished. The gift has vanished by means of some sort, by means of some spear, arrow, or club. I will never hear that chap speak after all. And my sorrow had a startling extravagance of emotion, even such as I had noticed in the howling sorrow of these savages in the bush. I couldn't have felt more of lonely desolation somehow had I been robbed of a belief or had missed my destiny in life. Why do you sigh in this beastly way, somebody? Absurd. Well, absurd. Good Lord, mustn't a man ever? Here, give me some tobacco. And here is where the frame story cuts in, and he's lighting a pipe from somebody else on the boat on the River Thames. There was a pause of profound stillness, and then a match flared, and Marlowe's lean face appeared, worn, hollow, with downward folds and dropped eyelids, with an aspect of concentrated attention, and as he took vigorous draws on his pipe, it seemed to retreat and advance out of the night in the regular flicker of tiny flame. The match went out. "Absurd," he cried. "This is the worst of trying to tell. Here you all are moored, each with two good addresses, like a hulk with two anchors, a butcher round one corner, a policeman round another, excellent appetites, and temperature normal, you hear? Normal from year's end to year's end. And you say, absurd? Absurd be exploded, absurd! My dear boys, what can you expect from a man who, out of sheer nervousness, had just flung overboard a pair of new shoes? Now that I think of it, it is amazing that I did not shed tears. I am, upon the whole, proud of my fortitude. I was cut to the quick at the idea of having lost the inestimable privilege of listening to the gifted Kurtz. Of course I was wrong. The privilege was waiting for me. Oh yes, I heard more than enough, and I was right too. A voice. He was very little more than a voice, and I heard him, this voice, other voices, all of them were so little more than voices, and the memory of that time lingers around me impalpable, like a dying vibration of one immense jabber, silly, atrocious, sordid, savage, or simply mean, without any kind of sense. Voices, even the girl herself, now. He was silent for a long time. I laid the ghost of his gifts at last with a lie, he began suddenly. Girl, what? Did I mention a girl? Oh, she's out of it completely. Okay, here's another place where the patriarchy comes in and is kind of misogynistic. The women, are out of it, should be out of it. We must help them to stay in that beautiful world of their own, lest ours gets worse. Oh, she had to be out of it. You should have heard the disinterred body of Mr. Kurtz saying, "My intended." So number 25, who is Kurtz's my intended? Oh, we didn't get to 24. We'll go back to 24. 25, who is Mr. Kurtz's my intended? That's his fiancée, the person he's going to marry. You would have perceived directly then how completely she was out of it. And the lofty frontal bone of Mr. Kurtz. They say the hair goes on growing sometimes, but this specimen was impressively bald. The wilderness had patted him on the head, and behold, it was like a ball, an ivory ball. It had caressed him, and lo, he had withered. It had taken him, loved him, embraced him, got into his veins, consumed his flesh, and sealed his soul to its own by the inconceivable ceremonies of some devilish initiation. So this is him talking about how Kurtz has become one with the native people. He's become part of the darkness, according to Marlowe. He was its spoiled and pampered favorite. Ivory, I should think so. Heaps of it, stacks of it. The old mud shanty was bursting with it. You'd think there was not a single tusk left either above or below the ground in the whole country. Mostly fossil, the manager had remarked disparagingly. It was no more fossil than I am, but they call it fossil when it is dug up. It appears these natives do bury the tusks sometimes, but evidently they couldn't bury this parcel deep enough to save the gifted Mr. Kurtz from his fate. Number 26, what is fossil ivory? It's ivory that has been buried to try and save it from the white people taking it. We filled the steamboat with it and had to pile a lot on the deck. Thus he could see and enjoy as long as he could see, because the appreciation of this favor had remained with him to the last. You should have heard him say, "My ivory." Oh, yes, I heard him. My intended, my ivory, my station, my river, my... Everything belonged to him. It made me hold my breath in expectation of hearing the wilderness burst into a prodigious peal of laughter that would shake the fixed stars in their places. Everything belonged to him, but that was a trifle. The thing was to know what he belonged to, how many powers of darkness claimed him for their own. This was a reflection that made you creepy all over. It was impossible. It was not good for one either, trying to imagine. He had taken a seat amongst the devils of the land. I mean, literally. You can't understand. How could you? With solid pavement under your feet, surrounded by kind neighbors ready to cheer you on or fall on you, stepping delicately between the butcher and the policeman, in the holy terror of scandal and gallows and lunatic asylums. How can you imagine what particular region of the first ages a man's untrammeled feet may take him into by the way of solitude? Utter solitude without a policeman, by the way of silence. Utter silence where no warning voice of a kind neighbor can be heard whispering of public opinion. These little things make all the great difference. When they are gone, you must fall back upon your own innate strength, upon your own capacity for faithfulness. Of course, you may be too much of a fool to go wrong, too dull even to know you are being assaulted by the powers of darkness. I take it no fool ever made a bargain for his soul with the devil. The fool is too much of a fool, or the devil too much of a devil. I don't know which. Or you may be such a thunderingly exalted creature as to be altogether deaf and blind to anything but heavenly sights and sounds. Then the earth for you is only a standing place, and whether to be like this is your loss or your gain, I won't pretend to say. But most of us are neither one nor the other. The earth for us is a place to live in, where we must put up with sights, with sounds, with smells too, by Jove, breathe dead hippo, so to speak, and not be contaminated. And there, don't you see? Your strength comes in, the faith in your ability for the digging of unostentatious holes to bury the stuff in. Your power of devotion, not to yourself, but to an obscure, back-breaking business. And that's difficult enough. Mind, I'm not trying to excuse or even explain. I'm trying to account to myself for Mr. Kurtz, for the shade of Mr. Kurtz. This initiated wraith from the back of nowhere honored me with its amazing confidence before it vanished altogether. This was because it could speak English to me. The original Kurtz had been educated partly in England, and, as he was good enough to say himself, his sympathies were in the right place. His mother was half English, his father half French. All Europe contributed to the making of Kurtz, and by I learned that, most appropriately, the International Society for the Suppression of Savage Customs had entrusted him with the making of a report for its future guidance. Okay, this is an important part. So Kurtz has been sent not only to get ivory, but he's part of this International Society for the Suppression of Savage Customs. This is very similar to that last little bit about in Things Fall Apart, isn't it? About what the white guy says he's going to do with Okonkwo's body. Okay, so here's what Marlowe says about Kurtz's report. And he had written it too. I've seen it. I've read it. It was eloquent, vibrating with eloquence, but too high-strung, I think. 17 pages of close writing he had found time for. But this must have been before his, let us say, nerves went wrong and caused him to preside at certain midnight dances ending with unspeakable rites which, as far as I reluctantly gathered from what I heard at various times, were offered up to him, do you understand? To Mr. Kurtz. So Kurtz wrote this report about how to suppress the natives before he became one with them and had made himself a god in their eyes. But it was a beautiful piece of writing. The opening paragraph, however, in the light of later information, strikes me now as ominous. He began with the argument that we whites, from the point of development we had arrived at, must necessarily appear to them, savages, in the nature of supernatural beings. We must approach them with the might as of a deity, and so on and so on. By the simple exercise of our will, we can exert a power for good practically unbounded, etc., etc. From that point he soared and took me with him. Remember that, gold, God, and glory? So he's looking for both God and glory here. The peroration was magnificent, though difficult to remember, you know. It gave me the notion of an exotic immensity ruled by an august benevolence. It made me tingle with enthusiasm. This was the unbounded power of eloquence, of words, of burning noble words. There were no practical hints to interrupt the magic of current phrases, unless a kind of note at the foot of the last page, scrawled evidently much later in an unsteady hand, may be regarded as the exposition of a method. It was very simple, and at the end of that moving appeal to every altruistic sentiment it blazed at you, luminous and terrifying, like a flash of lightning in a serene sky. Exterminate all the brutes. So he goes on talking about how he needs to appear to be a light. Kurtz wants to be a light to the native people. He wants to be a god to them and to show them the way. And then his last thing that he says is kill them all. The curious part was that he had apparently forgotten all about that valuable postscriptum, because later on, when he came in a sense came to himself, he repeatedly entreated me to take good care of my pamphlet, he called it, as it was sure to have in the future a good influence upon his career. I had full information about all these things, and besides, as it turned out, I was to have the care of his memory. I've done enough for it to give me the indisputable right to lay it, if I choose, for an everlasting rest in the dustbin of progress, among all the sweepings and, figuratively speaking, all the dead cats of civilization. But then, you see, I can't choose. He won't be forgotten. Whatever he was not common. He had the power to charm or to frighten rudimentary souls into an aggravated witch dance in his honor. He could also fill the small souls of the pilgrims with bitter misgivings. He had one devoted friend, at least, and he had conquered one soul in the world that was neither rudimentary nor tainted with self-seeking. No, I can't forget him, though I am not prepared to affirm the fellow was exactly worth the life we lost in getting to him. I missed my late helmsman awfully. I missed him even while his body was still lying in the pilot-house. Perhaps you'll think it passing strange, this regret for a savage who is no more account than a grain of sand in a black Sahara. Well, don't you see? He had done something. He had steered. For months I had had him at my back, a help, an instrument. It was a kind of partnership. He steered for me. I had to look after him. I worried about his deficiencies, and thus a subtle bond had been created, of which I only became aware when it was suddenly broken. And the intimate profundity of that look he gave me when he received his hurt remains to this day in my memory, like a claim of a distant kinship affirmed in a supreme moment.